welcome to a new presentation of Ecology class. My name is Divna, and this would be a presentation of biogeochemical processes, the second part. In the first part we talked about three other processes. Today we are left with oxygen and nitrogen cycle. We will start with the oxygen cycle. So oxygen is like carbon and hydrogen, a basic element of life. In addition, in the form of ozone, so O3, it provides protection of life by filtering out the sun's UV rays that enter the stratosphere. In addition to making about 20% of the atmosphere, oxygen is ubiquitous. So, in the early evolution of the Earth, oxygen is believed to have been released from water, vapor, and UV radiation and accumulated in the atmosphere as the hydrogen escaped into the Earth's gravity. So, it's called a process of photolysis, but today we know that the main source of atmospheric free oxygen is actually photosynthesis, which you of course know is a process of making sugars and free oxygen from carbon dioxide and water. So this is a process that higher plants on land are able to proceed with, and in the water biomes it will be a phytoplankton. Oxygen is also released as organic carbon in CHO shape in the water, and that's how it gets buried in the sediments. By far the largest reservoir of Earth's oxygen is definitely within the silicate and oxide mineral crusts and mantle, about 99.5% basically. So one of the examples would be quartz, a mineral which is the most common on our planet. Only a small portion actually has been released as the free oxygen to be used by a biosphere. The atmosphere next to the crust is another big reservoir of free oxygen, that small part we mentioned, for usage of organisms on the planet. The oxygen cycle is driven by a process which demands oxygen to be consumed by heterotrophs, and then on the other side, carbon dioxide is a product of that reaction. The main way free oxygen is lost from the atmosphere by these reactions would be via respiration and decay, but also shell material, but only in the shape of CHO, like we mentioned in the previous slide, within the water ecosystems, of course. The story about oxygen is it is also needed for decomposition of organic waste. So waste from living organisms are biodegradable because of the aerobic bacteria, which convert organic waste material into stable inorganic material. So basically they are the ones keeping those biogeochemical cycles we talk about now, make their flow by converting organic into inorganic. So in the case there is not enough of oxygen available for the aerobic bacteria, because in the case of enormous quantities of waste in the body of the water, aerobic bacteria die and anaerobic bacteria take over. They are the ones that don't need oxygen to survive. So these bacteria, anaerobic ones, change waste material into H2S and some other poisonous substances. And then for this reason, the content of biodegradable substances in wastewater expressed by a special index called biological oxygen demand, or BOD, and is representing the amount of oxygen needed by aerobic bacteria to decompose the waste. And this is the main reason why the level of oxygen is really important to maintain in a reasonable levels to maintain the need for organisms in the certain surrounding. This is the table representing the reservoir capacity and so on. Flux would mean flow, and the residence times would be the time that the specific shape of the oxygen stays within the certain sphere, so atom or bio or so on. Now we'll pass on the nitrogen cycle, the last one we have left in all these biogeochemical main processes. And nitrogen is another element crucial for life on Earth. So, for example, it is a key element for all the amino acids. alanine, glycine, lysine, and the others. Those are the main material for making proteins. Also presents in the basis of constructions of DNA or RNA, so both protein and pyrimidine bases. And another example is with the plants. It is a part of a chlorophyll molecule. Nitrogen cycle is a process in which nitrogen is transformed in few chemical shapes by means of different biological chemical processes. 4 of those are the most important one. So fixation, ammonification, nitrification, and denitrification. The largest part of the Earth's atmosphere, basically around 78%, is nitrogen. So atmosphere is the largest storage of this element on Earth. However, atmospheric nitrogen is very inert gas, so it's unusable for plants and animals in that way. So to make it usable for heterotrophs or autotrophs, nitrogen must be transformed to some other reactive form. This is a really complex form. So in the next 2 slides I will show it to you. It's basically the part of one scheme, but it was too complex to put it on one slide. It will be too many details and hard to explain, so I basically just cut it in half. So the upper part, which takes only the shallow parts of the ground and the above part of basically the atmosphere, is represented on this slide. And we'll start with fixation. This is a process by which the atmospheric nitrogen is converted in ammonia, so NH3, or sometimes nitrates. And this is a vital process for all the green plants, because they have need for nitrogen in this form of ammonia or sometimes in nitrate. And it is also necessary for synthesis of amino acids we mentioned before, in proteins and so on. So this process of fixation can be done in 3 different ways as represented here. We'll start with the atmospheric. In this case, during the thunder's photons from lightning, they form a nitrogen monoxide by adding atmospheric oxygen to atmospheric nitrogen. So we end up with a nitrogen monoxide. The other option is this, so it's an industrial way of fixation, and it is explaining the combustion of fossil fuels, for example from car engines or industrial facilities, since they release various nitrogen oxides. This process happens under great pressure, under the atmosphere by 600 degrees Celsius. This would be the process of production of fertilizers in the ground or explosives. In the end, the largest part of nitrogen fixation is performed by bacteria in this biological fixation process, and these bacteria can be free or sometimes in symbiosis with plants, as represented here. On the ground, nitrification bacteria live in soil. They are also, of course, presented in an aquatic habitat. So this would be the first part of a nitrogen fixation process, as we call the nitrogen cycle. After this, we'll start with denitrification, and the process is happening deeper in the ground. So we're basically going down. We are lower under the ground. These are the bacteria shown in the previous slides, of the free ones and the one in symbiosis with the plant root. And we ended up with the shape of NO3 or NH3 as mentioned before. So we'll talk about ammonification, which is also called the mineralization process, and it is a process in which heterotrophic bacteria or sometimes fungi, not represented here, convert the organic nitrogen from animal excrement or dead plants and in the non-organic in the form of ammonia. So let's go back to the previous slide. See the animal excrement, or imagine this is a dead plant or dead animal tissue, converts by bacteria straight into ammonification that further goes to NH3 shape. When it's in this shape, it goes through the process of nitrification, so we have nitrate. Nitrification is the process basically in transformation of inorganic form of nitrogen, so-called ammonia, into an oxidizing shape, so it's nitrates or nitrates. So there are two stages of this process, 1 and 2. So in this first stage, the ammonia is converted into nitrate complexes by means of species of bacteria such as Nitrosomonas. It's one of the most important, famous ones for the process of nitrification. And then we end up with this, with a nitrate complex. And then we have a second part of this process of nitrification. And this phase is presenting the further oxidation of nitrates into nitrites by other types of bacteria such as Nitrobacter. And this phase is very important because accumulated nitrites are toxic to plant life. So it is really important to convert nitrites into nitrates, which further life can actually use for other physiological process. Now we'll talk about the process started in the previous slides here, so denitrification, which is basically going upstream, the only one. From here, see, from NO3, denitrification, and it is a process of reduction of nitrates into an inert nitrogen gas, the one we met in the atmosphere, so regular N2 shape, and that's basically considered as the end of a nitrogen cycle. This process includes bacteria, for example Pseudomonas or Clostridium, and also some fungi which use nitrogen as the source of oxygen to the anaerobic environment. They do not need oxygen for the main physiological processes. And we are only left with the runoff process. It is happening because of the high solubility of the ground, and also its inability to keep anions, so nitrate, end up in the groundwater through soil. The bad side is that high levels of nitrates in the groundwater are poorly reflected in the drinking water because nitrates affect the oxygen level in the blood of infants, so it's causing something called metaglobinemia, or so-called a blue baby syndrome. The groundwater rich in nitrates during the charging surface flows can cause so-called water bloom, and it's the accident where enormous overpopulation of algae occurs, and it further leads to excessive consumption of oxygen, meaning that there is not enough left in the surrounding water, other organisms like fish, and there's a high mortality of life in water when it comes to water bloom. Just to recapitulate, since it was a one scheme divided into two slides, this is the simpler scheme of the same thing on the same picture. So to repeat, there's few ways how to fix nitrogen from the atmosphere, since it is really inert gas and not usable for organisms on Earth. So next to organic nitrification bacteria, it can also be done in the atmosphere, or fertilizers and or combustion of fossil fuels. So once we fixed nitrogen, this is the most common way to have it fixed into ammonia shape, which further goes to nitrification by bacteria. So from nitrates it's going to nitrites, which can further be used through denitrification back to the simple shape of N2 in the atmosphere, or could be assimilated by plants, which further could be eaten by animals, and then we end up with the animal waste or dead tissue from both plants and animals, and it goes back to ammonification process of ammonia through nitrites to nitrates, which can be further used in this process. The other option is that some of the processes of fixation are fixing nitrogen directly into nitrates or sometimes nitrates. I hope this wasn't too complex, and I hope you understood everything I tried to explain it today, and see you in some of the next presentations. Bye.